Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today I'm going to show you how to install Proxmox on a TerraMaster server. I'm going to walk you through the entire process all the way through to the graphical user interface there. Before we go any further though, a few things off the bat. Number one, what exactly is Proxmox? So there's a number of you that might be thinking, oh, I've got an old NAS system that I want to bung Proxmox on and make the most out of, but there's going to be a lot of users watching this video going, just what the hell is Proxmox anyway? Well, Proxmox is, in essence, a virtualization platform. Although most network-attached storage providers have their own VM app hypervisor built into their operating system, a lot of users like to use an external, a kind of base-level, bare-metal hypervisor for VMs to have a better access point to a lot of the hardware resources and divide them up appropriately. And although you can run it in, you know, a multitude of different platforms, repurposing an old NAS can make a lot of sense. You've already got a lot of storage already available, and they're designed for 24/7. So utilizing something like Proxmox, which is an open source virtualization tool that you can install on the NAS and therefore appropriate not only the CPU and the memory inside, but the network connectivity and the storage, is tremendously appealing. Another thing about Proxmox in its open source nature is, although it is by no means the most widely used virtual machine platform in the world, it's worth highlighting that because it's open source, not only is it free, although there is a premium support package, on top of that, you've got access to pretty much all the fully featured extras that the likes of Hyper-V and VMware, which are enterprise-grade tools, stick behind subscription walls. One of those commonly requested ones, of course, is high availability, but there are still lots of other cluster-supported services and more rolled into Proxmox that are all within that open source structure and completely free. So, in order to do this, we're going to need the following items, most of which are essential, some of which are optional. Number one, we need a TerraMaster NAS. Now this is the T9423. Now normally with these open source installation videos, I go for some of the smaller NAS systems. I'm going for the larger one for a reason that will come clear later on. But particularly if you're going to use Proxmox, because unlike my videos where I talked about Unraid and TrueNAS, which in themselves were server OSs, because Proxmox is meant to be supporting VMs, that plural there, VMs, means you can be running multiple different instances of things, and therefore going for a system with a decent amount of storage space may be advantageous, particularly for if you're doing snapshots of them or retaining images of those VMs across their multitude of deployments. Secondly, this system is a lot easier to show you the internal hardware architecture and the one change we have to make internally, hardware-wise, than those smaller ones. And I will say, regardless of the TerraMaster system you are using, as long as it has been released after 2019 and it is running on at least an Intel-based processor, you can do this today because they're all built relatively the same regardless of scale. It's just a question of the power of the hardware. So you need your TerraMaster NAS, make sure it's Intel or AMD x86 based processor released after 2019 in terms of TerraMaster releases. Next, you're going to need a USB, more on that later on. But I do recommend going for this one. This is the little SanDisk 32 gig module there. There is a 16 gig as well, but I would, you know, bump for the 32 because the prices are largely the same. But mainly it's because this USB is frigging tiny and you are going to need a very small USB drive. Again, the reason for that will become clear later on, but there is a reason I've gone for this absolutely tiny USB drive. Next, and this one's optional, you're going to need an M2 NVMe because the majority of TerraMaster NASs released after 2020 have an M2 slot inside. And although it's not hugely necessary to have an M2 NVMe for this, you can install a SATA SSD there or use traditional hard drives. Proxmox runs at its best when it's running off an NVMe, so when it's hosting all the VMs, which in of themselves may have their core installation on the same drive that you're utilizing for Proxmox, for the main, handling of the virtual environment and containers, of course. I recommend going for an NVMe, but you're going to need at least 120 gig. But again, you scale that up depending on the range of VMs you're running. But for Proxmox on its own, you don't need to go higher than about maybe 60 to 120 gig. Next, you're going to need, briefly I might add, a keyboard. You definitely need a USB keyboard, standard USB. You can't use a PS2 keyboard. And you can use a mouse. You may find it useful to have a mouse. It will make things easier, but that is not essential. Finally, you're going to need an HDMI output. So you're going to need some kind of monitor via HDMI, or in my case, for the sake of recording this video, I'm using a HDMI capture box, but that's only so I can record the footage that I'm showing you today. Otherwise, you're going to need an HDMI monitor, at least for the start of this installation. So that's all the parts we need. Let's get most of those off the table. I should have added the other thing we need is a laptop. I hate seagulls. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to switch over now to my laptop interface there. So we're going to flick over in 3, 2, 1, go. And then from here, you're able to see, hopefully on screen, if I move that mic a little bit closer, the Proxmox installation page. I'm just going to bring that up and double check that OBS is indeed recording that there. Yes, it is. So we're going to get our USB drive there and pop that inside one of our available ports. Now, when you install it inside, whether you're using an old USB drive that you have knocking around or you've purchased a new one, you may need to format it. If you do need to format the drive, again, you can go into the bottom menu to type in disk management. And then from there, you can go ahead and start formatting drives. Or if you want to do it in a great deal quicker way, you can use something known as a disk part. So for example, there is our drive unallocated there. But later on, I can show you exactly how to format that drive with disk part there. But as you may see, when I've connected that drive, because it's a pre-formatted drive, it has not appeared on my range of available drives. It should have appeared there. Appeared. Good Lord. English, man. Speak it. So the next thing we need to do is download Proxmox, the 7.4 ISO installer. So go ahead and click download on that installer page and it will start downloading that. I've already downloaded that there, so I'm going to cancel it. But for you, make sure that download finishes. The reason I'm doing that is so there's no lag with what we're doing. Next up, as I take my watch off while it hits the table, next up, you're going to need to download the program known as Rufus. This allows you to convert an ISO or a disk image into a USB bootable, because TerraMaster NAS doesn't have any kind of DVD, Blu-ray drive or anything like that for us to mount a disk. So scroll down and just find ideally either the full Rufus 3.2.2 version, or you can go for the portable version. Either one of those is fine. Click it, immediately downloads for you. Next up, if you do need a reminder, this is that SanDisk. I'll link to it in the description. Again, it is about the size of the USB. You are technically paying probably $1 or $2 more for this USB than others, but it's just I've tested this on multiple different NAS systems in multiple different setups using internal USB drives sometimes, and that scale is very, very important. And again, when it comes to the SSD, I've looked at a few there, and the Silicon Power, I've reviewed them here on the channel in their Gen 4 generation. Although it's not the highest speed, you know, with regard to the M2s inside the TerraMasters, a lot of them are restricted to Gen 2, 3x2, or even 3x1 in some cases. So there's no point going for an M2 NVMe in excess of 1,000 to 2,000 megabytes per second performance anyway. So this drive here at 128 gig for just $18, that's a good shout for me. But again, you can get your own SSD and it's optional as well. So you can use a SATA drive if you choose. So once you've downloaded all of those applications that we're talking about there, head into your download section and boot up Rufus. Now, whether you've installed it, and you might see a black screen there while I'm loading that up, have Rufus and it will open up there. Now, if you've got that USB drive connected, as I showed you just now, it should appear here. If the drive has a label or a name on here, you need to remove that. So you're going to need to format it. Now, this is where disk part comes in. If the drive already has a name that you can't change, or it already has partitions, like you've inserted the USB and it's got lots of little sub drives, go to the bottom and again in that search menu type disk part. Now open up disk part. You may see a black screen. That's just Windows looking for authentication. From here, type the words list disk, and this will list all of the connected drives on your system. So for example, as you can see there, although I'm only seeing 2 drives here, it lists all 3. You can see that USB. So if you need to remove any identity to that USB, format it, remove any partitions, next thing you need to do is select disk and then put the number, in my case disk 2. So select disk 2 and then type the word clean. That will clean that USB of all partitions and identity. Okay, so it's just a lot easier than going through computer storage management and deleting all of those different partitions. So you can do that, close there. We can close that down there and go back into the Rufus application there. Now from the Rufus application, and I know a lot of you are looking at my desktop going, my God, it looks an absolute mess there. And you know what? You're right. This is a working computer. Shockingly, it gets to be something of a mess. But within Rufus here, let's move that to that screen. What we need to do is make sure that disk has been selected. Then go down to the select button, click select, and then find that download that you just did of Proxmox. There we go, Proxmox VE 7.1. Then select open. As you can see, it will say to you it's an SO hybrid, but it does allow you to turn it into a USB. From there, double check that it's not selected anything other than that GPT setting there, because you do not want that to be an MBR master boot record, because that can lead to inconsistencies if you happen to reboot your local system there. But for now, all of those settings should be fine. Double check what you're seeing is what I'm seeing, and then just go ahead and click start. It will warn you that you're going to format the drive, but just go ahead and click OK there. It will start to convert that Proxmox ISO now into a USB bootable drive with that free Rufus software there. Once it's done, we're going to safely disconnect that drive and make our way over to the TerraMaster for the next step in this installation. But for now, we're going to let it finish up there. Any minute now. It's double checking everything's fine. And boom, as you can see, it's already started booting up weird windows. The reason is that it creates individual partitions for Proxmox on that drive. Once that's done, go to the bottom of the screen. I know my camera's in the way, but just take my word for it and eject that USB safely. Very important, always eject safely there. So now I'm going to switch back over to the camera here in the studio. So let's bring that back up and do a little bit of pokery jiggery. And we're back here in the studio. So, move that out of the way. So the next thing we need to do is get the TerraMaster prepared for our installation. So, in the case of this device, what we do is we remove this side panel. I've already removed the screws. Put that down there. And again, if you're using some of the desktop-based devices, some of the more compact chassis, if you remove the rear screws, check out my video on installing TrueNAS or Unraid on a TerraMaster, and you'll see the dismantling of the smaller form factor devices. But in the case of this device, it just makes it a lot easier to show you those internals there. So that is all of our internal hardware. And the thing we're interested in is right here at the top. If I bring that closer, you can see a small black USB drive there. Now that USB drive inside here, that is what stores the TerraMaster TOS software. That is TerraMaster's own software. Now, it doesn't run from that USB. What that USB does is store the latest installer, the bootloader of the TerraMaster TOS software, and every time you update it, it updates that little USB, and if you format the system from the beginning, it uses that USB to install the TerraMaster software. So what we're going to do is remove that USB. Now, make sure you keep it safe. Do what I do, get yourself a silly little bag, an anti-static bag, and then pop that USB inside and make sure you keep this safe. Because if you need to roll your TerraMaster back onto the TerraMaster software, you are going to need this. Also bear in mind that if you do have any of your TerraMaster data on these drives, you are going to lose it if you try to introduce these into a VM within Proxmox. Those TerraMaster drives in a TerraMaster OS setup right now are bound to that OS. So if you try to mount them to a non-TerraMaster system and a non-TerraMaster OS, you're going to lose that data. And although what we're doing today is completely reversible, bear in mind that what you're doing could also result in TerraMaster no longer supporting you. So do bear that in mind. So we pop that USB to one side, and now we take our new USB. This is our new SanDisk SSD. This has got the Proxmox installer on board, and we pop it inside that USB port there. We'll replace the side of the case. Sorry about the loud noise near the mic. If we get that right first time. And now we just need to connect this TerraMaster up. Okay, so first up, make sure you've got your SSD installed if you did go ahead and want to install Proxmox on an M2 SSD. There should be an M2 slot inside, but otherwise, again, you can use SATA SSDs if you choose. Next up, make sure you've got your keyboard connected to the NAS in question, the TerraMaster there. You can use pretty much any USB port, but I'd recommend using USB 2 ports if they are there. And again, same goes if you're going to choose to use a mouse. Last thing, remember that you need to connect a visual output to this device. So again, for you, you're almost certainly going to use a standard PC monitor that you've got knocking around, but in my case, I'm utilizing a capture box. So I'm connecting the NAS via HDMI into this recording laptop here, but for you, you won't need to use something like that. So when everything is all set up and you've connected both power and you've connected a network connection to the NAS in question, it's all ready to go. Get ready to press power, but also get ready to spam the delete button on this keyboard as soon as the system boots up, like so. So I'm going to boot now in 3, 2, 1, go. And we rapidly spam that delete button. Now, we don't necessarily have to do this bit because the TerraMaster is designed to boot first and foremost from the storage media inside. But the Proxmox installation starts on the USB drive inside the system. So although it checks the USB, we need to make sure that the system is going to boot the Proxmox installer, the launcher, from USB, and then later on continue to work from the M2 NVMe. So what you need to do is make your way over to the settings in boot menu and double check the order there. Now, as you see, the USB drive is set to default from my previous ones. So what you want to do is boot from that USB first, but later on, when there's no USB inside there, you need to make sure the system is going to boot from the right order. Now, this is going to be different depending on your own setup. So for me, I do want the system to boot from USB first, but I don't want the NVMe, I don't want the hard disk to be second. I want the NVMe because that is where I'm going to be installing Proxmox. Now, if you've got other OSs on those drives, say you want to keep some drives in there from TerraMaster that have your TerraMaster RAID and data on there, then you need to make sure they're lower down the hard drive, the storage media boot options, such as hard disk here, than they are from the NVMe, because the NVMe is what we're going to use for Proxmox there. So for me, I'm quite happy with that on that list of options. And then what we can do here is go ahead, save changes, and exit. But remember, the boot order is going to be different depending on your own setup. Whether you're going to be installing the OS of Proxmox on the NVMe or on a SATA drive inside the main SATA bays there. But for now, we go ahead, click Save Changes and Exit. And now we allow the system to immediately boot, as you can see, from that USB drive. And now we have got the Proxmox installer. Now, there are advanced options if you choose to boot into a safe state or do some memory testing. So again, they're all options there. But for me, I'm not going to be doing any of that. I'm going straight into the installation of Proxmox. Now, this is what I mean about whether you're going to be utilizing a keyboard and mouse setup or just a keyboard, because there are going to be options that you're going to need to navigate, and there is USB mouse support. So if you've got one, great stuff. But otherwise, it's really easy to scroll through with the standard tab and arrow keys there all the way through. Proxmox installer takes around about 2 to 3 minutes to beat up there. As you can see, it's periodically testing the available range of connected drives, because again, it will see all of each of the drives that are inside there, but attaching them all in Proxmox to different VMs is a little bit more complex and probably a little bit deeper, something for a future video there when it comes to utilizing a pre-existing hard drive to MOBO network architecture there. But now it looks like we're going to be getting ready onto the grey screen with the arrow any second now. Now we're around about in the home stretch, and as you can see there, now we can make our way through these options. First thing I'm going to do is move myself maybe to the bottom left option there. And carry on with this installer. So what we need to do now is start making our way through the list of options there on screen. So I'm just going to start scrolling along and just scroll all the way down to the bottom and then agree to the TNC. From there, it's going to ask you where you want your OS to be installed. So again, depending on the drive you've got inside, different drives will appear. So in my case, I'm going to go for that SSD you can see there. But again, you can change a lot of the options, a lot of the configuration, the size of individual areas that you want to use on those drives. But this is why we go for that M2 NVMe, because it's pretty much ready to go. We click next. Now we've got to put our country in, and this is what's going to be used later on for some of the Connect services. So again, I'm going to select the United Kingdom. I'm going to scroll all the way along and click next. Remember to use tab to go through all of those options, just like any, even Windows CE, I think, use that kind of stuff. Next, create your password. Your login should be the root system of login authentication, but we'll double check that later on. And add an email address, because you might want to be utilizing this for recovery, as well as if you want to use some of the VE server capabilities from Proxmox. Then click next. Now this is if you're going to be using a lot of remote access stuff, or you want the default LAN stuff there. So if you don't know what you're doing, don't worry, you can change all of this from within Proxmox later on. But this just also allows us to continue the rest of this installation from within the web browser. But as you can see, we'll make a note of that ending in 100.2 IP there. But your IP will almost certainly be different. Then we see the summary here on screen of the finalization of basically the general information there that we've gone through right now. And what we need to do is make sure where it says automatic reboot after successful installation to untick that option. Very important, because otherwise when that system reboots, it will try to reboot from that USB again and potentially overwrite the installation we've done here today. On the other hand, depending on the boot order that you've selected, perhaps you put your NVMe higher than that, it won't be too much of a difference. But for now, I'm going to, based on my installation here, make sure that it does not reboot after that initialization there. So again, we click install, and now it's going to install Proxmox on the M2 NVMe inside our TerraMaster there, and therefore allow us to use this TerraMaster NAS for running multiple bare metal directed virtual machines. And remember, with Proxmox, and we will be doing another video on how to attach all of the storage media drives, we'll be looking at other different NAS brands. From there, not only can you run virtual machines, but you can also run containers side by side. Something that traditional NAS users have always had to find a little bit more complicated, because you have to run another application such as Docker or any of the other applications out there for Docker's out there, Container Station and Portainer and stuff like that, or alternatively running that alongside the virtual machine tools such as VirtualBox or Synology Surveillance Station Manager, Virtual Machine Manager, or QNAP's own Virtual Machine Manager, their virtualization station. So again, we'll be looking at those brands later as well. But the Proxmox installation is relatively quick. It doesn't take that long. It's a very micro install. It's one of the great things about it. It's just very lightweight and very feature rich as well. But what I'm going to do now is just perhaps fast forward, because I don't think you need to listen to me for another 10 seconds or 15 seconds just rattling on. And our Proxmox installation is drawing to a close. And it's just doing the final touches there to make sure that NVMe becomes a bootable OS drive there within the architecture of the system. So once that finishes up, it should be any second now, it will allow us to make our way back to the initial screen of the Proxmox installer, whereupon, as you can see, it's now telling us that all we need to do is head over to that 100.2 IP in our web browser. So we don't need the KVM setup if we don't want, if we choose to start continuing that Proxmox installation. So we now got the options to reboot on the bottom right of the screen, and I've selected the wrong screen there to move, or we can abort and return to that original screen. So if we go for that reboot option, it's worth highlighting the system is going to try to reboot from the USB in this architecture. So for now, what I'm going to do is power down the system, and again, you can just go ahead and press that reboot or allow the system to do its own thing. And then from then, I'm going to remove this USB from within inside the system, allowing us to continue with our installation. So we can remove that. It's going to try and boot from that USB, as you can see there. So now what we're going to do is power down the system entirely. Because remember, it's not booting from that OS now, so it allows us to just allow the system to do a full flat out power down, which is what we've now got. From there, I'm just going to remove that USB. So now we don't need that anymore. I mean, you can keep it around, why not? And remember, you want to keep your TerraMaster USB safe, because that's the one that when you do want to reintroduce the TerraMaster OS, just reconnect that USB there and reboot the system. And bear in mind, because we've kept the boot order with USB first, it will immediately reinstall TerraMaster if you attach this in there with their TOS software. So now I've removed that USB drive. I can replace the side of this casing. I can disconnect all of the audio visual here. We don't need that anymore, because right now we're going to make our way over to the web browser in a moment. And now we're ready to go. We can go ahead and power up our TerraMaster NAS. Now, as the system boots and you've disconnected the visual output and you've disconnected the keyboard or anything like that, because the rest of this installation is done via the network, it's also worth highlighting that, again, your IP may have changed since that reboot there if you've got a dynamic IP environment there. So one of the tools that I recommend that you guys check out if you do want to stay on top of your network is to take advantage of Advanced IP Scanner. It's a completely free tool and allows you to scan your existing network, not only for old legacy devices that may have appeared on the network in their original identities, but also devices that are currently active. And as you can see, we've come in at the IP1112 there, largely because of that domain entry that I mentioned earlier on changing. So what we can do is make our way into a web browser here, and I've already opened it up. And once the device is booted, after a few minutes, you will hear a beep. You can log directly into the interface here, just double checking that camera's still recording. Yes, it is. Enter the information you created earlier for the login. Save it if you choose, or just make sure you do that secure login every time. As you can see, it's inviting you to take advantage of the subscription server services from Proxmox, which you can do. But now, of course, we've got the login on this TerraMaster NAS running Proxmox there. And if you choose to, you can go ahead up to the top and start creating your VMs as you see fit by naming them and assigning some of the available hardware environment. If you want to go to the trouble of adding those additional drives that are inside to select VMs, you would head into the PVE settings here and start going through the disk options in order to start adding some of those connected drives that are within the TerraMaster NAS system. There's some of my 14 TBs that I've attached inside the TerraMaster. There's lots of things you can do there, and if you choose, you can go ahead and create a container instead to have all of those individual applications installed there. And that's really it. That is how to install Proxmox on a TerraMaster NAS system there. After this point, do bear in mind Proxmox isn't the most user-friendly software, but it is by far one of the most fully featured virtual machine platforms available in open source, especially when you look at Hyper-V and VMware and some of the kind of subscription-based stuff. There's some of the services, but just bear in mind that there is going to be a steeper learning curve when creating your virtual machine environments there. And the last thing I will add is if you are going to be creating VMs on your system here, that uploading some of your available storage VMs in there with some of the ISOs you might want to add, I would add those in there, and you can drag and drop them in very, very easily, but it's just a question of following some of those guides. So again, thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed this, let me know. There should be a written guide in the description below going through all the steps we've gone through today. If not, it should be up very, very soon. And if you've got any other open source software you want to see how well it runs on these, I'm going to be looking at Open Media Vault as well very soon. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. Click like if you've enjoyed it, subscribe to learn more, and I will see you next time.